Here's a fact that should bother you. The wealthiest 1% of Americans now own more than the entire middle class combined, and it isn't because they work 100 times harder. It's because they play a completely different game, one nobody teaches you in school. Look at the gap. The top 1% of US households hold roughly 30% of all the nation's wealth. The entire bottom half, 165 million people, share about 2.5%. The same engine that grows their fortune barely touches yours. And the difference isn't the size of their paycheck. It's where the money comes from. The middle class earns. The rich own. That one word, my own, is the whole secret, and once you see it, you can't unsee it. Warren Buffett put the philosophy into one line. If you don't find a way to make money while you sleep, he said, you will work until you die. That isn't a slogan. It's a literal description of how the two classes split apart. This is a deep dive into the real mechanics of staying rich, owning assets, borrowing instead of selling, paying almost no tax legally, and compounding it across generations. Not tricks, the boring, durable machinery. Let's get into it. It starts with the single most important distinction in personal finance. The difference between earning money and owning things that make money. Here's the first clue. For the very richest, a wage is almost an afterthought. For the top 0.1%, the vast majority of income flows from owning things, businesses, stocks, property, not from a job. The middle class is the exact mirror image. Picture two people who both make $100,000 a year. One earns it from a salary, trade hours for money, and it stops the day they stop. The other earns it from assets they own, and it keeps coming whether they show up or not. Same number, completely different freedom. And ownership is brutally concentrated. The wealthiest 10% of American households own roughly 87% of all stocks. So when the market climbs, almost all of that gain lands in the same pockets, while the half of families who own little or none just watch. So the first move isn't a secret stock tip, it's a shift in identity from someone who collects paychecks to someone who collects assets. Every dollar you earn is a soldier. Spend it and it dies once. Send it to buy an asset and it works for you forever. Now the part that sounds like a conspiracy theory, but is written plainly into the tax code. It even has a blunt nickname: buy, borrow, die. It works in 3 steps. Buy assets that grow, stocks, companies, real estate. When you need cash, don't sell them, borrow against them. And the third step is the morbid one in the name. The genius is hidden in the middle. Here's the key. In most tax systems, you don't pay tax just because an asset went up, only when you sell and lock in the gain. So if you never sell and borrow instead, you can turn a paper fortune into spendable cash, and the tax never comes due. A loan, by contrast, isn't income, so it isn't taxed at all. The wealthy pledge their stock as collateral and borrow against it, often at rates far below what an ordinary borrower sees. They get cash today, while the assets keep compounding untouched in the background. And it isn't a fringe theory. A landmark investigation found that in some years, several of the richest people in America paid little to no federal income tax at all, entirely legally, precisely because their wealth grew without ever being sold. Then comes the third step. In the US, when the owner dies, heirs inherit those assets at current market value, and decades of untaxed gains are simply wiped clean. It has a name, the stepped-up basis, and by one estimate it shields well over $200 billion of gains from income tax every year. Which brings us to the quiet engine under all of this. The tax code rewards owning and punishes earning. Once you see how, you'll never look at your payslip the same way. Look at how two kinds of income are treated. In the US, top wages are taxed at 37%, but long-term gains on assets held over a year are capped at 20%. Same dollar, yet the one you worked for is taxed nearly twice as hard as the one your money earned. Stack it all up, and the result is startling. Studies of the very top estimate the wealthiest 400 US families pay an effective rate of around 20% on their true economic gains, below what many middle-class workers pay once payroll taxes are counted. It even shapes how they get paid. A founder CEO will often take a salary of $1. Famously, several have, and take the rest in stock. Why? A salary is taxed immediately at the highest rate, while stock can be held, borrowed against, and taxed lightly, later or never. And the uncomfortable point is that none of this is illegal. The rules aren't being broken, they're being used exactly as written. The system isn't rigged in the dark, it's rigged in plain sight, in a tax code most people never bother to read. No, the force that makes all of it actually work. The one Einstein supposedly called the 8th wonder of the world, even if he probably never said it, compounding, is the magic of it. At a 10% return, money roughly doubles every 7 years, but it isn't linear. A dollar invested bends upward, slowly at first, then violently. The real fortune is built in the final decades, not the first ones. Which is why starting early beats almost everything. And time matters more than the amount. Someone investing $200 a month from age 25 can easily outfinish someone investing twice as much who starts at 40. The early starter put in less money, yet ends with more, because their money had more years to compound. But compounding has a dark twin, and it's where the middle class gets trapped. Debt compounds too. The average US credit card now charges over 20%. So while the rich let assets compound for them, many families have compounding working violently against them, in reverse. That's the whole divide in one sentence, often attributed to a banker of the last century. He who understands interest earns it. He who doesn't pays it. The rich sit on one side of that line, The treadmill is the other. So if the formula is this simple, own assets, borrow cheaply, let it compound, why doesn't everyone do it? Because the middle class is quietly trapped on a treadmill built to keep them running in place. It starts with no slack. A large share of American adults say they couldn't cover a surprise $400 expense with cash on hand. If there's nothing left after the bills, there's nothing to turn into assets, and the wealth engine never even switches on. Then there's lifestyle creep, the silent killer. As income rises, spending rises to swallow it. A raise becomes a nicer car, a bigger mortgage, more subscriptions. The paycheck grows, but the surplus that could buy assets never does. You earn more and own exactly the same. And two debts that feel the same really aren't. The rich borrow to buy assets that grow. Good debt that pays for itself. The treadmill runs on debt for things that shrink. Cars, gadgets, vacations. One borrows to get richer, the other borrows to feel richer while getting poorer. Put it together, and the treadmill is almost elegant in its cruelty. No surplus to invest, raises eaten by lifestyle, cash eroded by inflation, debt compounding the wrong way, four forces all pulling the same direction, keeping you running and going nowhere. And here's the final layer, the one that turns a fortune into a dynasty. The rich don't just build wealth for themselves, they build it to outlive them. Over the coming decades, the largest handover of money in history is underway. By some estimates, well over $80 trillion will pass from older generations to their heirs in the United States alone. And the overwhelming majority of it flows to families who are already wealthy. But here's the part that matters for you. Almost none of this requires being born rich. The mechanics are public, owning assets, holding for the long term, avoiding bad debt, starting early. These aren't secrets behind a velvet rope. They're choices, open to almost anyone with a surplus to invest. So strip away the jargon, and the whole playbook fits on an index card. Own assets, don't just earn a wage. Use debt to build, never to consume. And give your money the one thing it needs most. Time. That's it. That's the machinery. You may never reach the top 1%. Most people won't, and that's honest. But you can step off the treadmill and onto the same machine the rich use. It just runs slower for you. The direction, though, is the only thing that ever truly mattered. If this finally made the wealth game click for you, do me a favor and follow Market Minute. Next time I'll break down exactly which assets ordinary people can start owning with their first $100. I'll see you there.